Before we unlock the classified files of Operation Silent Cord and expose the invisible machinery of intelligence tradecraft, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Turn on the notification bell. We are documenting the history that governments try to keep in the dark, and you do not want to miss the next investigation. The year was 2004. The location was everywhere and nowhere. In the world of counterterrorism, geography is often less important than the electronic signals that traverse it. The target was a man known within the corridors of Tel Aviv only as the Engineer of Shadows. His real name was Ibrahim al-Masri, but to the operatives hunting him, names were temporary labels for a persistent threat. Al-Masri was not a soldier who stood on battlefields. He was a phantom. He built devices of extraordinary complexity, miniaturized explosives that could be hidden in a camera lens or a fountain pen, and then he would vanish. For 3 years, the Israeli intelligence community had been chasing a ghost. Al-Masri had no digital footprint. He did not use credit cards. He did not drive cars registered in his name. He did not sleep in the same bed for more than 2 consecutive nights. He moved through the chaotic urban sprawl of the Middle East like a whisper, protected by a layer of operational security that frustrated the most advanced surveillance technology in the world. He understood that in the modern age, connection is death. To be connected is to be trackable. So he severed every tie. He cut off his friends. He cut off his political allies. He became an island. But human beings are not designed to be islands. Even the most disciplined operative, the most hardened ideologue, has a tether to the world they left behind. For al-Masri, that tether was not political or religious. It was biological. It was the woman who had given him birth, an elderly widow named Fatima, living in a small dust-choked apartment in Amman, Jordan. The realization did not come from a satellite image or a high-ranking defector. It came from a psychological profile constructed by a woman who would become al-Masri's nemesis. Her name, for the purpose of this file, was Yael. She was not a commando. She did not carry a suppressed pistol or know how to jump out of airplanes. She was a singular talent within Mossad's research division, a specialist in human behavior and linguistic analysis. While the generals looked at maps of strongholds and supply lines, Yael looked at the silence between the noise. She argued that al-Masri's extreme isolation was not a sign of strength, but of a brittle, cracking foundation. She posited a theory that was initially dismissed by her superiors. The engineer was lonely. The silence he had cultivated to stay alive was slowly eroding his resolve. He needed to hear a voice that did not speak of war, operations, or logistics. He needed to hear his name spoken with affection, not fear. Yael believed that if they could control the line of communication to his mother, they wouldn't need to hunt him. He would come to them. This is the story of how a global manhunt was narrowed down to a single frequency, and how a son's devotion became the coordinate for his own neutralization. Yael sat in a windowless room in Herzliya, surrounded by the hum of server racks and the glow of multiple monitors. This was the nervous system of the hunt. To the outside world, she was a mid-level analyst in a government bureau. Inside the agency, she was known as a weaver, someone who took disparaged threads of signal intelligence, SIGINT, and human intelligence, HUMINT, and wove them into a trap. Her target, Ibrahim al-Masri, had recently escalated his campaign. A series of sophisticated devices had been discovered near strategic infrastructure in the north. They were disarmed before they could function, but the message was clear. The engineer was active, and he was getting closer. The pressure on the Prime Minister's office was immense. The directive came down: stop him by any means necessary. Traditional methods had failed. They had turned his former associates, but al-Masri never told anyone his plans. They had compromised his suppliers, but he scavenged parts from consumer electronics, making his supply chain untraceable. He was a master of what intelligence officers call low-tech stealth. He used couriers who didn't know what they were carrying. He used public payphones in crowded markets, speaking in code for less than 30 seconds before disappearing into the crowd. Yael's approach was different. She spent weeks studying the file of Fatima al-Masri. She read the transcripts of the mother's medical appointments. She analyzed the grocery lists found in the trash by local assets. She built a life in her mind. inhabiting the world of this 70-year-old woman who spent her days watching television and drinking tea, waiting for a son who might never return. He's a narcissist, Yael told her division chief during a briefing. Not in the vanity sense, but in the need for reflection. He sees himself as a savior, a historical figure. But without an audience that truly knows him, the persona collapses. He doesn't call his mother because he loves her. He calls her because he needs to be reminded that Ibrahim exists, not just the engineer. The chief was skeptical. We have tapped her phone for 2 years. The line is dead. He knows better than to call a landline in Amman. It's suicide 101. He won't call the landline, Yael corrected, tapping the glass screen of her monitor. He will call a number that doesn't exist yet. We have to give him a safe channel. We have to make him believe he's outsmarted us. The plan Yael proposed was called Operation Silver Cord. It relied on a specific technological vulnerability of the time. Prepaid satellite phones were becoming common in the region, used by smugglers and aid workers alike. They were difficult to triangulate if the user kept the calls short. Yael wanted to manipulate Fatima's environment to force a crisis, a situation where the need for communication outweighed the protocol of security. She wasn't going to wait for a call. She was going to manufacture the necessity of one. It was a cold calculation, using an elderly woman's health and anxiety as a weapon of war. In the world of espionage, morality is often measured in lives saved versus lives used. Yael had done the math. If al-Masri continued his work, the cost would be immeasurable. If Fatima was frightened for a few days, it was a price the agency was willing to pay. The first step of Operation Silver Cord was isolation. Fatima had to feel that her world was shrinking. Mossad operatives in Amman, working under deep cover, began a subtle campaign of disruption. It started with the mail. Letters from her extended family in the West Bank stopped arriving. The agency intercepted them, cataloging the contents and storing them away. Then, the landline in her apartment began to malfunction. It wasn't a total blackout, which might alert al-Masri's security instincts if he had people watching the house. It was intermittent static, dropped calls, the frustration of a connection that wouldn't hold. Fatima was a woman of routine. Every Tuesday she went to the local clinic for a checkup on her blood pressure. The clinic was the only place she socialized. Yael directed the asset team to deploy a Sayanim, a helper. In this case, it was a woman posing as a new nurse at the clinic. The nurse, fluent in the local dialect and trained to project warmth and concern, began to plant seeds of worry in Fatima's mind. She didn't speak of politics. She spoke of health. "Your heart rate is irregular, Hadja," she would say, furrowing her brow while looking at a chart that showed perfectly normal readings. "You need to be careful. Stress is very dangerous for you right now. Is there family you can stay with?" Fatima would shake her head. "My son is traveling for work." "He should know," the nurse would insist, gentle. "A son should know when his mother is fading." The word fading was chosen carefully by Yael's psychological team. It implied a gradual disappearance, a twilight. It was designed to trigger the specific guilt of the absentee son. Simultaneously, the technical team was preparing the bait. They knew that al-Masri used a network of cutouts, intermediaries who passed messages. One of these was a shopkeeper in a dense neighborhood of Damascus. The shopkeeper didn't know he was being watched. He thought he was just passing letters to a courier. Mossad operatives intercepted a courier midway through his route. They didn't arrest him. They detained him for 20 minutes at a fake checkpoint, searched his bag, and inserted a single sealed envelope into the mix before letting him go. The envelope contained a SIM card and a short note, written in a handwriting that perfectly mimicked Fatima's shaky script, a forgery created by forensic artists in Tel Aviv. The note read, "The phones are broken. The silence is heavy. The doctor says my heart is tired. Use this if you need to hear me one last time." It was a gamble. If al-Masri suspected the SIM card was compromised, he would go deep underground, perhaps for years. But Yael was banking on the silver cord, the connection between mother and son. The SIM card was rigged. It wasn't a standard tracker that beaconed its location constantly. That would be detected by al-Masri's electronic sweepers. This SIM was dormant. It would only wake up, ping the satellite, and reveal its location when a call was actually made. They were handing him a loaded gun and betting he would pull the trigger because he couldn't stand the silence. The package was delivered. The courier dropped it at the dead drop in Damascus. The shopkeeper picked it up. A day later, it was gone, collected by a shadow. Then, the waiting began. Intelligence work is often depicted as a series of adrenaline-fueled chases. In reality, it is 99% boredom and 1% sheer terror. For Yael and her team, the next 3 weeks were an exercise in agonizing patience. They sat in shifts in the listening room, headphones around their necks, watching a flat green line on a frequency monitor. They had teams on standby in 3 countries. A Kedon unit, the tip of the spear, was training in a mock-up apartment in the Negev desert, practicing breach and clear maneuvers. They didn't know where they were going yet, only that when the green line spiked, they would have to move within minutes. Yael hardly went home. She slept on a cot in her office. She reread the psychological profile. Had she pushed too hard? Had the forgery been too desperate? Al-Masri was paranoid. He checked everything. If he put that SIM card into a spectrum analyzer, he might see the modified firmware. In Amman, Fatima's anxiety was real. The nurse continued the pressure. "You look paler today, Hadja." The phone line at her home finally died completely, cut by a technician at the local exchange who had been bribed to accidentally sever the wrong wire. Fatima sat in her apartment, isolated. She began to talk to herself, or rather, to the empty air. The bugs planted in her walls picked up her prayers. She prayed for Ibrahim. She prayed for his safety. She prayed for his voice. Yael listened to these prayers. It was a violation of privacy so profound it made her stomach turn. Yet she justified it with the images of the devices Al-Masri built. The ball bearings, the nails, the intent to maim. "We are stealing her grief to save others," Yael whispered to herself one night, staring at the ceiling. It is a fair trade, but doubt is the constant companion of the handler. Every day of silence was a victory for the engineer. It meant he was disciplined. It meant he was putting the mission above his humanity. Then, on the 24th day, at 03 hour in the morning, the green line spiked. The alarm was silent, a flashing red light on the main console. The technician on duty jolted awake and slammed his hand on the alert button. Yael was in the room in under 60 seconds, her eyes wide, hair disheveled. "Status?" she demanded. "Handshake confirmed," the technician said, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "The SIM card has activated. It's searching for the satellite network, Thuraya 2. Location? Triangulating. It's rough. The signal is bouncing. He's in an urban canyon. Lots of concrete, lots of interference." The screen displayed a map of the Middle East. A large red circle appeared, covering southern Lebanon, parts of Syria, and northern Israel. It was uselessly large. "Wait for the voice," Yael ordered. "Do not initiate the active trace until the voice connects. If he detects a ping, he'll dump the phone." The connection established. In Amman, Fatima's secure mobile phone, which the nurse had given her for emergencies, began to ring. The surveillance cameras hidden in her living room showed the old woman waking up on her sofa. She looked at the phone with trembling hands. She answered. "Hello?" There was a pause. Static. Then a voice. Low, distorted, but unmistakable to the voice print analysis software running in Tel Aviv. "Mother. Ibrahim." Fatima's voice broke. She began to weep. "My son. My heart. Don't cry," the voice said. It was cold, controlled, but there was a tremor in it. "I received your note. Are you ill?" Yael signaled the tech team. "Now, narrow it down." The triangulation algorithms went to work. The signal was coming from a dense urban area. The red circle shrank. It excluded Syria. It excluded Israel. It centered on Beirut, specifically the Dahieh district, a stronghold of militant activity, a fortress of narrow streets and high-rise apartments controlled by organizations hostile to Israel. "He's in the hornet's nest," the chief of operations muttered, standing behind Yael. "Dahieh. We can't just walk in there." "Keep him talking," Yael whispered, as if she could telepathically influence the old woman in Amman. "Don't let him hang up." On the line, Fatima was pouring out her soul. The doctor says I am fading, Ibrahim. I just wanted to hear you. They cut my phone lines. I am all alone. I know, Mother. I know it is hard. But this line is not safe. I have to go. No, Fatima cried out. Just 1 minute more. Tell me you are eating. Tell me you are safe. Do not leave me in the dark. The engineer hesitated. Yael saw the hesitation in the silence on the waveform. The discipline was fighting the guilt. I am safe, he said finally. I am in a place where they cannot find me. I am continuing the work. Forget the work, she shouted. What about your life? The call lasted 2 minutes and 12 seconds. In the world of signals intelligence, that is an eternity. By the time Ibrahim al-Masri hung up the phone and removed the battery, the red circle on the map in Herzliya had shrunk to a 3-block radius in southern Beirut. They didn't have the apartment number, but they had the neighborhood. And in the game of hide and seek, knowing the neighborhood is the beginning of the end. The call had ended, but the hunt had shifted gears. It was no longer a passive listening operation. It was an active manhunt. The intelligence was passed to the planning directorate. A 3-block radius in Dahiya was a nightmare. It was a labyrinth of concrete, underground bunkers, and civilians who served as an unwitting shield for the operatives living among them. Aerial surveillance was authorized immediately. High-altitude drones, invisible from the ground, began to circle the coordinates. They weren't looking for a face. They were looking for a pattern. The team analyzed the satellite imagery of the 3 blocks. They looked for anomalies. Which apartment had windows that were never opened? Which building had power consumption that didn't match the number of registered residents? Which balcony had laundry drying that matched the description of a single male? Yael shifted her focus. She had broken his silence. Now she had to break his cover. She reviewed the audio of the call again and again. She isolated the background noise. Filter out the voice. She ordered the audio engineers. Give me the room tone. They pushed the faders. The voice of the engineer disappeared, replaced by a low, rhythmic thrumming. What is that? Yael asked. Air conditioning? Too low frequency, the engineer said. It's mechanical. Heavy machinery. A generator? Maybe. Or a large ventilation system. Yael looked at the map. Find me a building in that sector that sits next to an industrial ventilation unit or a large generator complex. The analysts scoured the imagery. There was a bakery on the corner of the 2nd block. It had large industrial fans on the roof. Next to it was a nondescript 4-story residential building. The hum of the bakery's ventilation would be audible through the walls of the adjacent apartments. It matches, the analyst said. The acoustics align with the 3rd or 4th floor of the building adjacent to the Al Manara bakery. They had the building. Now they needed to know if he was inside. Sending a team into Dahiya to knock on doors was impossible. They needed eyes on the ground. This required a Katsa, a field intelligence officer. They needed someone who could walk into that neighborhood, look at the building, and verify the target without getting their throat cut. The mission fell to an operative operating under the cover of a Canadian journalist documenting the struggle of the urban poor. He walked the streets of Dahiya with a camera and a notebook. He wasn't looking for al-Masri. He was looking for signs of life in the target apartment. He stopped at the bakery, bought bread, and casually glanced up at the adjacent building. The 3rd floor shutters were drawn tight. But on the balcony, hidden behind a drying rack, was a small, almost invisible detail. A high-gain Wi-Fi antenna, painted to blend in with the stucco wall. It was the kind of tech you don't use to check email. It was the kind of tech you use to tunnel through firewalls and encrypt communications. The operative snapped a photo, pretending to photograph a cat on the street corner. The image was transmitted to Tel Aviv. That's him, the operations chief said. That's the burrow. The mother's call had done its job. It had forced the ghost to manifest. Now, the machine of the state prepared to close the trap. The confirmation of al-Masri's location triggered a crisis of decision-making within the highest echelons of the defense establishment. Dahiya was not neutral ground. It was hostile territory, effectively a fortress governed by local militias with their own security apparatus. A direct raid by a large commando force would result in a firefight, civilian casualties, and potentially a regional war. The red page, the authorization for neutralization, was signed, but the method was debated. An airstrike was proposed, a precision missile through the window of the third-floor apartment. It was clean, low risk to Israeli personnel, and decisive. Yael, surprisingly, argued against it. "If we strike from the air," she told the planning committee, "we turn him into a martyr instantly. We destroy the evidence. We need to know what he is building. We need his hard drives. We need to know who he is talking to. If we vaporize the apartment, we lose the intelligence." She advocated for a silent entry, a surgical operation on the ground. It was incredibly risky. If the team was cornered, there would be no easy extraction. But the potential intelligence windfall, the blueprints for the next generation of devices, was worth the risk. The decision was made. Operation Silent Cord would transition to the execution phase. The team selected was not the hammer, but the scalpel. 4 operatives from the elite unit, fluent in Arabic, disguised not as soldiers, but as maintenance workers for the local power grid. The cover was solid. The power infrastructure in Beirut was crumbling, and repair crews were a common sight, often ignored by the locals. Yael watched the preparations with a sense of dread. She had manipulated a mother to find a son, and now she was sending 4 men into the lion's den to kill him. She detached herself from the emotion. She focused on the file. Al-Masri was not a victim. He was a man who had turned a wedding into a funeral 3 years ago with a backpack bomb. He was a man planning to do it again. The mother, Yael asked the operational commander, "What happens when?" "After. We disconnect the silver cord," the commander said. "The nurse disappears. The phone goes dead. She becomes just another old woman in Amman." "She will know," Yael said. "Mothers always know." "That is not our concern, Yael. Your job is done." But Yael knew her job wasn't done. She had to monitor the line until the very end. The mission had a start time. 02:00, the deepest part of the night. The night of the operation was moonless. The humidity in Beirut was stifling, a thick blanket of air that muffled sound. The 4 operatives arrived in a battered utility van, wearing grimy jumpsuits with the logo of the electric company. They parked 2 blocks away. They moved on foot, carrying toolboxes that contained suppressed submachine guns, flashbang grenades, and electronic breaching tools. They walked with the weary gait of tired workers, blending into the shadows. In Tel Aviv, the operations room was silent. The drone feed showed the thermal signatures of the team moving down the street. They were 4 cold spots in a warm city. They reached the building. The lock on the front door was picked in 7 seconds. They moved up the stairs, avoiding the creaky steps. The stairwell smelled of old cooking oil and damp concrete. They reached the 3rd floor. The team leader deployed a fiber optic camera under the door gap. The feed flickered onto the monitors in Tel Aviv. The apartment was dark. A figure was sleeping on a mattress in the main room. Next to him was a workbench covered in wires, soldering irons, and blocks of plastic explosive. "Positive ID," the team leader whispered into his comms. "Target is sleeping. Explosives are present. Danger close." The presence of open explosives changed the dynamic. A firefight could set off the room, bringing the whole building down. They couldn't shoot their way in. They had to be silent. "Green light for silent breach," the command came from Tel Aviv. The team placed a magnetic charge on the lock, a device that melts the internal mechanism without an explosion. They counted down. 3, 2, 1. The door drifted open. The team flooded the room. They moved like smoke. Al-Masri stirred. His instincts, honed by years of running, screamed at him. He sat up, reaching for a pistol under his pillow. He was fast, but the operatives were faster. 2 distinct muffled sounds, thwip, thwip, cut through the air. Al-Masri slumped back onto the mattress. The threat was neutralized. "Target secured," the team leader whispered. "Start the harvest." For the next 10 minutes, the operatives didn't celebrate. They worked. They photographed documents. They pulled hard drives. They swept the workbench for schematics. They were intelligence vacuums, sucking up every scrap of data that the engineer had hoarded. Then they vanished. They left the body, left the apartment, and faded back into the Beirut night. By the time the neighbors woke up to the sound of the morning call to prayer, The van was gone, and the evidence was on its way to the border. The debriefing in Tel Aviv was celebratory, but subdued. The intelligence recovered from the apartment was a gold mine. It detailed the schematics for a new type of smart bomb that could bypass airport security scanners. The operation had stopped a catastrophe that hadn't happened yet. Yael sat in her office looking at the file on her desk. It was marked closed, but there was one loose end. In Amman, the nurse had visited Fatima one last time. She told the old woman she was being transferred to another clinic. She took the special phone back, claiming it needed a software update. Fatima sat in her chair, staring at the empty space on the table where the phone had been. The news hadn't broken yet. The discovery of the body in Beirut would be reported as a mysterious death or a gang dispute. The organization would know, of course, but the mother, she was in the dark. Yael dialed the number of the clinic's reception, pretending to be an administrator. She asked for the file on Fatima al-Masri to be archived. "She hasn't come in today," the receptionist said. "We haven't seen her." Yael felt a cold prickle on her neck. She checked the surveillance feed from the apartment. The cameras had been deactivated as per protocol after the mission. The window into Fatima's life was closed. The victory felt hollow. Yael had used the purest human emotion, a mother's love, as a homing beacon for a missile. It was necessary. It was effective. But it left a stain on the soul that no amount of justification could wash away. She walked out of the office, into the blinding sunlight of the Israeli afternoon. The world kept turning. People bought coffee, caught buses, argued about politics. They didn't know that the reason their bus didn't explode was because an old woman in Amman had been tricked into making a phone call. Weeks passed. The intelligence community moved on to the next target, but Yael couldn't let go. She used a generic internet connection to browse Jordanian news sites. She found it in the obituaries of a local Amman paper. A small notice: Fatima al-Masri died peacefully in her sleep, survived by no one. The date of death was 2 days after the operation. Yael stared at the screen. The official cause would be heart failure. The nurse had been right. Her heart was tired. But Yael knew the truth. It wasn't the blood pressure. It was the severing of the cord. The intuition that something terrible had happened, a cosmic ripple that a mother feels when her child is gone. The engineer had built bombs to destroy the world. Yael had built a trap to destroy him. In the end, they both left wreckage behind. The operation became a case study at the academy. Young cadets studied Silver Cord as a masterpiece of psychological warfare. They analyzed the timeline, the tech, the risk assessment. They marveled at the efficiency. Yael was promoted. She became a section chief. She taught a seminar on the human terrain. She taught her students that every target, no matter how monstrous, is human. They have fears, they have habits, they have mothers. And these are the cracks where the light gets in and where the knife goes in. But she never told them about the obituary. She never told them about the nights she lay awake, imagining the phone ringing in an empty apartment in Amman, echoing in the dust. The war in the shadows is necessary. It protects the innocent. It upholds the state. But it consumes the people who fight it. It asks them to trade their empathy for efficiency. Years later, Yael stood on a balcony overlooking the Mediterranean. She was retired now. The world had changed. The technology of Silver Cord was obsolete, replaced by cyber warfare and AI algorithms. But the principle remained. She watched the waves crash against the shore. She thought about Ibrahim al-Masri. He had chosen a path of violence, and it had led him to a violent end. He was not a victim. He was a combatant. And yet, she couldn't help but think of the final conversation, the 2 minutes and 12 seconds. "Tell me you are safe," the mother had said. "I am in a place where they cannot find me." The son had lied. Yael closed her eyes. In the end, he was right. He was in a place where no one could find him. But she was still here, watching, listening, carrying the weight of the secrets that kept the world turning. This is how the machinery works. It is fueled by silence, greased by deception, and paid for in the currency of the human soul. Operation Silent Cord was a success. But in the secret history of intelligence, there are no happy endings. There are only missions accomplished and the long, quiet wait for the next phone to ring. Thank you for reading this classified file. If you want to uncover more stories from the archives of the Shadow War, remember to subscribe. The next operation is already unfolding somewhere in the dark.